Serious, what is genuinely one of the most terrifying sounds you've heard, whether in real life or recordings? I remember waking up in the middle of the night to some hoarse whispering sound. It was super dark and I was trying to figure out where it was coming from, but it seemed to be close by. When I turned my head, it was like right in front of my face, and I look and see two huge eyeballs staring at me. It was our cat. I guess she wondered why I wasn't paying attention to her. The scream of a husband realizing his wife of 40 years was gone. It was my very first cardiac arrest call as a student while I was in EMS. I was with an extremely skilled medic and I used every ounce of training and knowledge I had and did CPR till my arms felt numb. In the end, she still didn't make it. I'll never forget her, or him. And I'll never forget that cry, pure and absolute grief, heartbreak and terror, a sound of pure, gut-wrenching emotion that felt like it made my chest collapse. The Japanese tsunami warning siren, it stirs up so many emotions at once and gives a sense of urgency. The silence of the operating room after an emergency C-section for the birth of my first child. It was only about 20 seconds, but after it being a non-planned C-section, which turned into the baby getting stuck and my wife going into shock and losing 3 liters of blood, I thought my entire world had just been shattered, and I can't fully explain how terrifying it was. When I was camping, I once woke up in the middle of the night to hear crunching on the gravel around my tent. I listened to it for what felt like an eternity as it wandered around our site. We woke up the next morning to find cougar tracks all over, and I was so thankful that I managed to stay silent. Dog's death call. I thought it was bullshit, but I've heard it twice in my lifetime. It's a call/growl from a dog to say that it's given up and about to die. The first time I heard it, it was so horrifying that I instantly knew what it was. The dog was dead within the hour even after we got him to the vet. Second time I heard a dog do it, he was dead within 5 minutes. Both times they were the family dog, and it's like someone stabbed a dagger made of ice straight into your heart. House alarm going off during a middle of the night home break-in, while pregnant with first child. I honestly thought my heart would explode from the adrenaline rush. I recently went camping for the first time with some friends from college. This was my first time sleeping in a tent in the middle of a forest, so I was a little nervous to begin with. But right as I was starting to drift off, I heard a blood-curdling screech from what I assume was some small animal being killed. It had me wide awake and unable to fall asleep for the next hour or so. A baby screaming in the middle of the night, like screaming in pain and ear-splitting in agony, like it was being murdered, over and over again. It would stop sharply and then scream again as if it was being attacked. My little one was a baby then too. I was frantic and called the police. Mom instinct took over and I was running up and down the street and alleyway to find where the crying was from. I thought someone had abandoned a baby or something, but I couldn't tell which house it was coming from. Terraced houses. It was an injured fox and I felt really stupid. I'll never forget the sound. Foxes really do sound like that. I just never heard one. Poor fox. The police were really nice about it and said they've had calls like this before, and they called the RSPCA for the fox too. I was about 11 and I woke up to the sound of my mom screaming my name and help. It was genuinely the most fear-inducing thing I've ever experienced. As I got up, I started screaming back to her. And the thoughts going through my mind were, home intruder, my mother is dying, I'm going to go down here and either be killed or have to kill someone. As I raced down the hallway to the stairs, it felt like I was running in air. My body felt like a balloon that someone started a forest fire inside of. It was that fear that makes you aware of every fiber of your being, the type that makes your body feel clumsy and inadequate. I jumped the MF stairs like Hulk off of a skyscraper. I made contact with maybe 3 steps, and I tuned to in while left and my mom is standing on a chair. It was a mouse. The phone call of a guy who was in one of the twin towers when collapsed. Also, the brick video. I have never seen that one, I admit, but I've heard so much about it on here that I know to never, ever watch it. It's weird that I'm traumatized by a video I've never even seen. One sounds that still haunts me is the noise my ex would make before he would start convulsing from a seizure. The sound of all the air in his lungs being pushed out abruptly. While on a hike/hunt for elk, we came up on a carcass. Looking at the bones, we saw teeth marks. My stepdad said this is a wolf kill. Then we heard the low growl from the trees. We all looked at each other, chambered rounds, and slowly walked out of there. The entire time we heard growls and brush moving. Then suddenly there was silence. I used to live with my sister during my last teenage years. She had this Holland Flop bunny as her pet. He was a sweetheart that loved to cuddle. One day, I was getting out of the shower and I heard this absolutely blood-curdling scream. I wrapped a towel on quickly and dashed into the living room to see what was up. The poor bunny had trapped himself and gotten tangled up in some headphones. I had to calm him down and unwrap him. War of the Worlds tripod siren terrified me as a kid, especially living in Tornado Valley. Those tornado sirens made me think the tripods have risen. My dad coming into the house and instantly saying, "Get out of the house, there's a gas leak." For context, me and my brother, had been home alone for 6+ hours and had noticed that there was a rotting beef-esque smell in the kitchen, and we shrugged it off as the garbage can smelling like ass, and took the garbage out. That didn't get rid of the smell, so we tried using air freshener. That didn't work either. My brother was legit about to light a candle before I decided to call my dad and tell him what was up. He thought maybe something had gone rotten in the fridge or freezer and just to wait as he would be home in 5 minutes. He comes in and freaks out, telling us to open up all the windows and get out of the house. As it turns out, our old ass oven broke somehow and was letting off gases into our kitchen and living room. If my brother would have lit that candle, we would have blown up the house and almost certainly died. We were staring down the face of death and didn't even realize. When I was a teenager, my family and family friends would spend a week together camping at the start of the year. One night myself and friends were telling each other scary stories. We decided to go for a walk, just out of the grounds around midnight, and out of nowhere heard what was clearly a kid screaming. It was terrifying, especially after we had told scary stories. We called out to ask if everything was okay, and adult responded that she was his mom and that he began having night terrors. Because we were all in close proximity, she'd taken him a bit past the grounds so not to wake everyone else. It was so scary and we were hesitant to leave because a screaming kid and an adult, but it was thankfully okay in the end and we saw them the next morning. This literally happened yesterday morning. I heard a huge bang and my parents shouting. Like genuine, terrified shouting. I've only ever heard my dad shout like that twice. He was truly terrified. Then I heard my parents running down the stairs and running out the front door. My neighbor who lives opposite had fallen from 2 stories off of the scaffolding on his house, straight onto concrete. No helmet or protective gear. I had to call the ambulance. My voice was trembling. They came within minutes and got him to hospital. He's broken multiple ribs, fractured his spine and his pelvis. Honestly, it was the best outcome considering what could have happened. He isn't paralyzed and has no brain damage. My dad was the first to get to him. He said he genuinely thought our neighbor was dead. I once heard what I thought was a child screaming at the top of their lungs, but it was a rabbit that the neighbor's cat had caught. Was so loud and unnerving. First high-tech startup in semi-manufacturing equipment. We needed custom fluorine chemistry and set up a meeting with a UC Berkeley professor who was a Nobel laureate. He introduced us to the grad student he thought best and our group walked up and down the hallway looking for a place we could all sit. After peering in every lab, we went back to the first lab and sat on whatever we could find. The grad student was sitting on a tall stool next to a trash can. He tilted back and then abruptly straightened up as though he had lost his balance. At that moment there was a loud bang, which I first thought was him kicking the trash can. Then came the most horrific scream I've ever heard, like the death cry of an animal. 10 or 15 seconds of pure horror. Turns out another grad student just down the hall had been running a reaction in a pressurized container. He reached for it, it exploded and he lost several fingers and one eye. We were all badly shaken. Mine would have to be the bomb alarm system. Truly a cold, terrifying sound. I feel like, if you hear that, you are pretty much doomed. I live in Hawaii. I woke up when I was about 9 I think and decided to chill in my room watching YouTube. Everything was dark in my room because I was too lazy to open the curtains, and when I was watching YouTube, I got an alarm on my phone. You know the flash flood alarms you get every once in a while. I thought it was that at first, then I read it and it said ballistic missile incoming. Seek immediate shelter. Needless to say, I was scared out of my mind. Walked out of my room, talked to my grandparents. Of course there was no missile coming, so that was a relief. Funny thing is, both of my parents slept through the whole thing. My mother screaming my name. She was in a fit of rage over something I had forgotten to do that minorly inconvenienced her. Yet she felt it was my duty to do it. She has a short temper. 13-year-old me thought the world was collapsing down on me. The steel-on-steel screeching cacophony of a massive freight train desperately trying to stop in time when there is a vehicle stuck on the tracks. One listens frozen with anticipatory dread, waiting for the added sickening crunch of impact. Saw and heard a chef at my old job slip into a deep fryer both hands first. Will never ever get that blood-curdling scream out of my head. It's been 13 years and I still hear it. I was once listening to music in my bedroom, when suddenly my speakers started buzzing and out of nowhere they just say in a static-coded voice "we won't" and then resumed playing the song as if nothing happened. This song does not have "we won't" in its lyrics. I got chills, freaked out, unplugged, and I refused to sleep in my bed that night. The sound of the black hole NASA recorded recently just makes you realize how much we don't know about the endless empty void surrounding us. The first time I heard howler monkeys while camping in Central America. Then I actually saw them the next day. They sound much bigger and scarier than they look. As a kid I accidentally drove over a pretty large, hairy caterpillar with my bicycle. I was going pretty slow up a steep hill and tried to swerve, but failed. I swear I could hear it scream. A Florida panther got into my dad's henhouse/chicken yard behind the main house. Happened around 11 p.m. one night, and by the time we heard the commotion the panther had retreated to the palmetto stands on the paper company land next door. I can't even describe what the panther's howl sounded like, but it's not like the MGM lion or the cat roar you hear in sound effects, more like someone being strangled and screaming at the same time. I was watching an Iron Man championship thing on TV late at night. The dude went to go lift and his arms clicked. His animal scream of pain and sadness is one of the most jarring and scarring things I've ever heard in my life and still haunts me. The front door opening at work a few weeks ago past dark and I was the only person in the building. Me and a friend were walking home. It was dark and we were walking along an alley. We were able to make out a cat as we were walking along. As we passed this said cat, it meows at us, except this was no normal meow. It sounded exactly like the cat had said hello and we both screamed and ran full pace. It scared the life out of me. I was woken around 2 to 3 a.m. by abrupt loud metal screeching. Trying to make sense of it in my exhausted and suddenly terrified state. It just doesn't stop and there's wettish squish-like and crinkling sounds along with it you can only hear when the metal screeching stops for a few seconds. Straight out of a horror movie. It was my stupid ding of a cat that jumped straight into the new kitchen trash can to eat the leftover Chinese food we threw out. Then he could not get back out. It was a repurposed smaller diameter metal drum. The change in my husband's breathing when I held his hand and told him I was there and loved him. We had just been told by the doctor that he was dying, and when I walked in he was struggling so hard to breathe. When I took his hand and said I was there, he stopped trying and relaxed. No one is ever going to be able to convince me he wasn't waiting for me to be with him. Broke my heart in a million pieces, but I take comfort from the belief he knew I was with him until the end. I was in a psych ward as a kid, and one of the elderly staff members all of a sudden started singing. She was clearly trying to scream, but it came out as a sort of operatic wail. She then slammed her hands down on the counter multiple times, probably to get someone's attention. Then she fell out of her chair and slumped behind the counter. She survived, thankfully, but man was that an experience. Was staying in my mate's grandparents' house when I was about 15, woke up at 3 a.m. to what sounded like blood-curdling screams coming from the field behind the house. This is in the Irish countryside and it was a quiet road, albeit with a decent couple of houses around, and I had a moment where I had to decide whether to ignore what could be a murder or possibly embarrass myself. I chose to do the right thing and wake everyone in the house, telling them I think one of the neighbors is being killed. At this point everyone is in a panic and freaking out. The granddad runs down the stairs with the shotgun and runs out the back door to listen. He then turned around laughing and informed me it was a fox. Turns out I embarrassed myself that day. My wife and I moved into our first apartment and went to bed. We wake up in the middle of the night to an eerie voice outside our bedroom saying, "Oh no no no." It just repeated over and over again. We're both panicking. I'm just yelling WTF as I dash out in my underwear, expecting to find a ghost or some drugged out intruder. It was our cat. He was stress puking from the move and doing his own terrifying version of the Olong Johnson thing. That noise the aliens make from the movie War of the Worlds. Being completely serious. Anytime I hear a noise similar to it, it makes me want to run and hide. Okay. Hurricane Ophelia in North Carolina, 2000-something. Me and some friends were vacationing at Emerald Isle and got evacuated. One girl's parents owned a house on Topsail, so we moved there. Vacationers had to evacuate but homeowners didn't. So, only a Cat 1 hurricane. We were gonna ride it out. They closed the bridges, cutting the island off, and turned off the water. No problem, we were sound side, we were dipping up water to flush the toilet. 6 of us there and we're all drinking and partying. Wind is howling, eventually the eye comes and it gets quiet. We're curious and want to run around outside. Young and stupid. The girl whose parents own the house is kinda drunk and takes off running down the middle of the street. There's a halfway down power line. She clotheslined herself. Hits her neck, body snaps back, down in the street. The twang of her hitting the power line and the thunk of her body slamming back into the road is something I'll never forget. The power was off to the line, she was too drunk to care about the fall, she was fine. But in that moment all I could think about is how we were cut off from the outside world, how maybe she was dead or I was gonna watch her die. There was no power to the line, she was okay. For me, there is nothing quite like being close to a lion when it roars. You not only hear it with your ears, but you can feel the resonance in your stomach. The meow my cat made when he wanted to come and when his leg was hanging off. The second he meowed I knew something was wrong. Not only did he normally just jump on the windowsill, this was a weird meow for him. Went out to go get him and there he was, leg dangling. That wail/scream that a mother does when she finds out her child is dead. I don't think I could ever describe what that feels like to hear that pain. Gunshots up close. I was at a red light and a car pulled up behind me and shot these 2 guys walking down the road. It was so close that I felt it reverberate in my core. This might seem like a cheap answer and not that serious, but it actually was and still is to this day the most terrifying sound I have ever heard. In Silent Hill 2 you walk into a room after a good hour or 2 of just roaming around aimlessly in some apartments trying to find a way out. Once you go in, the room seems like another random room in the building just with a slightly different design, but you hear this very very quiet whisper in your right ear that goes on for 2 good seconds and it is honest to God the most freaked out I have ever been. Linking it doesn't do it justice, it's the fact that the game is usually blasting some industrial noise and the complete silence of the room accompanied by the whisper that freaks out of you. The scream/roar/cry of a Tasmanian devil trying to scare other predators out of its territory. Really hard sound to describe, closest I've heard is a seriously pissed off Australian possum, nothing like the North American ones. I have heard it many times in my life and it scares the crap out of me every time. The freight train sound of a tornado. Hard pass on ever hearing that SHD again. Honorable mention to the old tornado sirens, as you definitely freeze and know shit's getting real when you hear it. Also a fox screaming. Sounded just like a woman screaming in pain or terror. There was this sound that was showcased in the YouTube channel Shrouded Hand. I guess it was third in the list, but anyway, the story goes that a woman was sleeping one night. She had a strange but unsettling dream. The dream was basically any normal dream but then shifts to a haunting Disney-like landscape. There was haunting music, whispering voices, and anything that would drive you insane. As the scene became unbearable she tried to call her house via voicemail, but the haunting music was very loud and very spine-tingling, that she screamed many, many times. In the final scream she woke up. This is where the creepiest part starts, and also where the recording fits into. After waking up, she immediately checked her phone and noticed that there was a new voicemail. To her horror the voicemail contained the exact same sounds she heard, the exact same screams she did when she was dreaming. Trust me, when I heard that recording, my body shuddered and felt so cold. Really dumb, but almost pooped my pants and thought my life was all over. Helium balloon banging off of a ceiling fan. It sounds like an intruder banging on a window. Rapidly. Not giving a single fuck about killing me, I was in the basement playing video games. I was on edge after hosting a birthday party for my kid for 30 people. Then at like 3 AM, I finally relaxed. Then, bam 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 bam. So many bams. I thought I was getting swatted. Nope, just a balloon hitting a ceiling fan. Terrifying. Hearing my parents arguing and yelling at each other 24/7. I remember once that my dad was probably drunk, and wanted to beat up my older brother. My brother was like 20. We ran out back to my room, seeing that my mom is sitting next to my brother crying. Had to listen to my upstairs neighbor assault his partner. He left in handcuffs. I can't unhear the sobs and screams. That Russian guy whose wife was killed by a brick through the windshield from a truck driving the opposite direction on the highway, his unmitigated horror and sorrow and his hysterical howling is haunting. The airplane alert in the pilot room screeching pull up, pull up, pull up, pull up. Long lasting that I still can't listen to videos of. The noise of a big earthquake, ground rumbling, twisting of buildings, glass shattering, followed by the eerie silence split only by crying and alarms blaring. One-off terrifying/terrible is the sounds of my mum taking her last breaths followed by silence and the tears of my dad, siblings and myself. Mountain climbing in the middle of winter in a blizzard. Standing on top of Ben Nevis. I just watched my close friend step into a gully and lost his grip. Down he went all the way. At that moment there was utter silence. Nothing. Then his map, unfolded, that was in a leg pocket shot up into the air. The silence was the worst sound I ever experienced. I worked in shelter for women and children fleeing domestic violence and human trafficking. One overnight shift I had a woman return before shelter opened for the day at like 4:30 a.m. She told me she used and slept in the park so she wouldn't lose her bed. I told her next time to call because I'd rather have you safe in shelter. She screamed. Her soul cried out. It was a sound like no other. Hollow. Desperate. Absolute anguish. She begged me to take it back. She collapsed on me and I knew. She had been assaulted in the park that night. In real life, death rattles, the irregular dying breaths of a person. People don't die like they do on TV. One deep breath and gone peacefully. It's a bad sound and process. The sound of a doorbell. At 2:15 in the morning of 2018 I was sleeping when I heard someone ringing the doorbell of my house. My mother went downstairs and saw that it was my drunk uncle. She invited him to come in and so he did, not long before of him to start to make a scandal and wanting to attack me and my 80 and 75-year-old grandparents who were sleeping. In the end we needed to call the police and he ended up going home. After a few weeks he kept coming back to our house always at the same time wanting to enter back inside. After that episode I never got to sleep properly again, always afraid that it would happen again. I really want us to be able to sell the house so we can move to a safe apartment. Note, I apologize for my bad English, hope I didn't commit any mistakes. I was helped by the translator. A car crash followed by a girl screaming. I was in an 8th grade maths class when just outside the window we heard two cars collide followed by the sound of a girl screaming. It was a busy road during peak traffic hours. This girl stopped at a stop sign when the car behind her rammed into her car. The guy was having a stroke while driving so his car kept pushing her car into oncoming traffic. I can't remember what happened after that but I remember my teacher bringing this poor girl into our class. I felt so bad cause she was in shock and surrounded by a bunch of nosy 8th graders. I don't know what happened to the guy but it was a horrible sound I will never forget. Especially her screams. Gotten used to it but I've heard footsteps almost every night upstairs in the attic. My house is old and the attic floor can't support someone over 170 pounds but it sounds like someone 6 feet plus is using all their force while walking. Still scares the crap out of me sometimes. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share and we will see you in the next video.